What
Oh
is that?
my god.
Stay back! I have to get closer!
Nobody expected a 12-year-old boy to survive what was coming. Nobody expected him to build anything. Nobody expected him to become the legend that mountain people would talk about for the rest of their lives. But that is exactly what Samuel Pritchard did. This is the story of how a child, kicked out into the snow with nothing, became a man who built everything. This is the story of desperation, courage, and one boy who refused to die. The day started like any other day in the Pritchard house. The cabin was small and broken, sitting on the edge of the Cascade Mountains like it might fall down any moment. Samuel Pritchard woke up to the sound of his father screaming. This was normal. His father screamed almost every day, but Samuel did not know that this scream would be different. This scream would change his entire life. This scream would send him into the wilderness with nothing but his clothes and his will to survive. Samuel was only 12 years old. He had light brown hair that was always messy, and eyes that had already seen too much pain. His hands were small but strong from working around the cabin. His body was thin from not having enough food. He lived with his father and his younger sister in a cabin that felt like a prison. His father was a man who drank every single day. He drank whiskey in the morning, whiskey at noon, and whiskey at night. The alcohol made him mean, it made him angry, it made him say terrible things to the people he was supposed to love. Samuel's mother had left years ago. She just packed a bag one morning and walked away. Samuel did not blame her. He understood that she could not stay in a house with a man who hurt her every day with his words, and sometimes with his hands. She sent money sometimes. Not much. But enough to show that she had not completely forgotten about her children. Samuel's sister, who was only 9 years old, still cried sometimes when she thought about her mother. Samuel had stopped crying. Samuel had learned that tears did not help anything. Tears did not change what his father was. Tears did not make the pain go away. On this particular morning, Samuel's father had been drinking since before sunrise. He sat at the kitchen table with a bottle in front of him, drinking and talking to himself about all the reasons why his life was terrible. He blamed his wife for leaving. He blamed his boss for firing him last year. He blamed the world for being unfair. He blamed everyone except himself. Samuel stayed quiet in his room. Staying quiet was usually the best strategy. If he stayed quiet, his father might forget that he existed. If he stayed quiet, maybe there would be no trouble. But his father did not forget. His father never forgot. Around noon, he stood up from the table and started yelling for Samuel. His voice was thick with alcohol. His words were angry and bitter. Samuel came out of his room slowly, walking carefully, trying to seem as small and harmless as possible. His sister watched from the kitchen, her eyes wide and scared. She knew what was coming. She had seen it before. "You," Samuel's father said, pointing at the boy with a shaking hand. "You are the reason my life is so bad. You and your sister, you eat my food, you waste my money, you make my life worse every single day." Samuel did not argue. He had learned that arguing only made his father more angry. He had learned that the best thing to do was to stay silent and let the anger pass through like a storm. But this time, the anger did not pass. This time, Samuel's father walked over to him and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. He was a large man, made larger by his anger. His hands were rough from years of work in the mines. His breath smelled like whiskey and rotting teeth. He pulled Samuel toward the front door of the cabin without saying anything. Samuel tried to understand what was happening. He tried to ask questions, but his father was not listening. "Please," Samuel said, "what did I do?" But his father did not answer. He just kept pulling, kept dragging, kept moving toward the door with the force of a man who had finally made a decision. Samuel's sister stood in the kitchen with tears running down her face. She wanted to help her brother. She wanted to say something, to do something, to stop what was happening. But she was only 9. She was small and scared. She did not have the power to stop a grown man in the grip of rage and alcohol. Samuel's father threw open the front door. Cold air rushed into the cabin. Samuel could see snow outside. Deep snow. Snow that covered the ground from the cabin in every direction, stretching toward the dark forest that surrounded their home like a wall. His father still had hold of his collar. Samuel's jacket was hanging on a hook by the door. His father grabbed it and threw it at the boy. "Get out," his father said. His voice was quieter now, but somehow more terrible because of it. "Get out and do not come back. You are nothing. You will never be anything. You are a burden and a waste. Get out of my house." Samuel stood in shock. He did not understand what was happening. Surely his father did not mean this. Surely this was just anger talking. Surely things would change when his father had more to drink or slept it off or felt different in an hour. But he was wrong. His father was completely serious. Samuel put on his jacket with shaking hands. The jacket was thin and torn in places. It would not be nearly warm enough for the cold outside. He looked at his sister one more time. Her small face was pale. Her eyes were red from crying. He wanted to say something to her, some words that would make her feel better, some promise that he would come back and everything would be okay. But he did not know what to say. He did not know if any of those things were true. His father pushed him toward the open door. "Go," he said. "Go right now, and if you come back, I will kill you. I swear it. I will kill you. You are no longer my son. You are nothing to me." Samuel stepped out into the snow. The cold hit him like a physical force. It took his breath away. It burned his face. The snow was deep, up to his knees in some places. He was wearing simple pants and a thin jacket and shoes that were not meant for snow at all. He had nothing else. No food, no tools, no map, no idea where to go or what to do. Behind him, he heard the cabin door slam shut. He heard the sound of it locking. He turned and looked at the cabin for a moment, hoping that his father would change his mind, hoping that the door would open again and his father would say that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that Samuel could come back inside where it was warm. But the door did not open, and Samuel understood in that moment that his childhood was over. In that moment, he understood that he had to survive on his own. In that moment, a 12-year-old boy became something more than a child. He became a survivor. He became someone who would fight against impossible odds. He became someone who would refuse to die. Samuel turned away from the cabin and walked into the forest. The snow crunched under his feet. The wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife. The trees around him were dark and tall and seemed to stretch up forever. He did not know where he was going. He did not have a plan. He only knew that he had to keep walking. He only knew that stopping meant dying.
Samuel walked deeper
and he was not
into
ready
the
to die.
forest.
Not yet.
One step,
not like this.
then another
Not
step,
after only 12
then
years
another.
of life.
His feet were already numb from the cold. His thin jacket flapped around his body like it was trying to abandon him. The snow was so deep that sometimes he fell forward and had to push himself up again. Nobody was following him. Nobody was coming to rescue him. He was completely alone. The sun was already moving toward the mountains in the west. Samuel looked around and realized something that made his stomach drop like a stone into a well. He had no idea where he was. He had lived his whole life in a cabin, but he had never wandered far into the forest. He knew some paths. He knew where some trees grew, but he did not know how to survive out here. He did not know how to make a shelter. He did not know how to make fire. He did not know anything that would help him right now. He was going to freeze to death. That was the simple fact. That was what was going to happen. He was a 12-year-old boy in a thin jacket in the middle of a frozen forest with no food, no shelter, and no knowledge of how to survive. When the sun went down, the temperature would drop even more. When the temperature dropped, he would get cold. When he got cold enough, he would die. It was simple. It was terrifying. It was inevitable. But Samuel did not lie down in the snow and give up. Something inside him refused to accept death as an answer. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was anger at his father. Maybe it was just the simple will to survive that all living things possess. Whatever it was, it pushed him forward. It made him keep walking. It made him start looking for anything that could help him live through this night. As the sky grew darker, Samuel noticed something. There was a cluster of evergreen trees ahead of him. The trees were tall and thick, and they had low branches that swept down almost to the ground. Maybe, just maybe, he could crawl under those branches and find some shelter from the wind. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. It was the difference between trying and giving up. It was the difference between life and death. Samuel pushed his way through the snow toward the trees. The cold was burning now. His hands had turned a scary shade of white. His teeth were chattering so hard that his whole head hurt. His body was shaking without him even trying to shake it. This was what freezing felt like. He understood. This was what death felt like. It was cold and painful, and it made you want to scream. He reached the evergreen trees and crawled underneath the lowest branches. The branches were thick with needles, and they blocked some of the wind. The ground underneath was a little bit drier than the snow outside. It was not much better, but it was something. Samuel curled up in a tight ball, pulling his knees against his chest. He wrapped his arms around himself. His thin jacket was now completely soaked from crawling through snow. It was not keeping him warm at all. It might actually be making things worse by holding the cold against his skin. Samuel lay there under the branches and tried not to think about anything. He tried not to think about his father. He tried not to think about his sister alone in the cabin. He tried not to think about the fact that he might be dead by morning. He focused on his breathing, in and out, in and out. He tried to keep breathing because he understood, somehow, that if he stopped breathing, he would stop existing. The night was the longest night of his life. Time seemed to move differently in the darkness. Sometimes he thought only minutes had passed. Sometimes he thought hours had passed. He did not sleep. He could not sleep. His body would not let him. His muscles would not relax. His mind would not stop. He just lay there, shaking, trying to survive, moment by moment. Around midnight, Samuel heard sounds in the forest. Animal sounds. Wolves, maybe, or something else. The sounds were far away, but they were there. He heard the wind carry them to him. He heard creatures moving through the snow looking for food or shelter or warmth. If any of those creatures found him, he had nothing to defend himself with. He had no weapons. He had no strength. He had nothing except his will to survive, and he was not sure if that would be enough. But the animals did not find him. The night passed. The cold continued, but somehow Samuel continued too. He did not freeze to death. He did not give up. He stayed alive through sheer, stubborn refusal to stop existing. When the sun came up the next morning, Samuel was still alive. His body was in terrible pain. His muscles ached like he had been beaten. His hands and feet had no feeling in them. His lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. But he was alive. He had survived one night, one impossible night, and that meant he could survive another. Samuel crawled out from under the branches. The morning was bright and cold and clear. The sky was that impossible blue that only happens in the mountains in deep winter. He stood up on shaking legs and looked around. The forest spread out in every direction. The cabin where he had lived was somewhere behind him, but he could not see it anymore. He could not go back. That was clear. His father had made that clear. So he had to go forward. His stomach was empty and screaming for food. But he had no food. He had no way to get food. He had no idea how to hunt or trap anything. So he ignored the hunger. He pushed it down into a small corner of his mind and decided to deal with it later. Right now, he needed to do two things. He needed to find better shelter, and he needed to find water. Samuel started walking again. This time, he walked more slowly. He looked carefully at the trees and the rocks and the snow. He was looking for patterns. He was looking for signs. He did not know what he was looking for exactly, but he understood that the forest would tell him things if he paid attention. After walking for several hours, Samuel found a stream. The water was partially frozen, but underneath the ice, he could hear it running. He knelt down and broke through the ice carefully. The water underneath was so cold it hurt his teeth, but he drank it anyway. The water was clean and pure, and it made him feel stronger for a few moments. That night, Samuel did not crawl under evergreen branches again. He had learned something from the first night. He had learned that he could survive cold. He had learned that his body was stronger than his mind thought it was. He had learned that the night, as terrible as it was, eventually became morning. He made a better shelter that second night. He found a spot under some rocks that blocked the wind. He gathered branches and needles and created a kind of nest that was a little bit warmer than the open snow. He did not sleep, but he was more comfortable. And comfort, however small, felt like a victory. Samuel did not know it yet, But he had just begun something incredible. He had just begun to learn how to survive. He had just begun the transformation from a kicked-out child into something much stronger. He had just taken the first step on a journey that would define the rest of his life. 2 weeks had passed since Samuel's father threw him out into the snow. 2 weeks of cold, hunger, and learning. Samuel was not the same boy who had walked into the forest that first terrible day. He was thinner now, much thinner. His clothes hung on him like they were made for someone bigger. His face had become sharper, his eyes harder. He was only 12 years old, but he looked much older. The wilderness was teaching him fast, and the lessons were written on his body. The hunger was the worst part. Worse than the cold. Worse than the loneliness. Worse than the fear of wolves. His stomach had stopped making noise a few days ago. It just felt empty. Completely, totally empty. Like there was nothing inside him but air. Sometimes Samuel would drink water from the stream just to make his stomach feel less empty. Sometimes he would chew on bark from trees, knowing it would not give him any real food, but hoping it would trick his body into thinking it had eaten something. He needed to eat real food, and the only way to get real food was to hunt. Samuel had been thinking about hunting since the second day in the forest. But he did not have a gun. He did not have a bow and arrow. He did not have any weapons at all. He had nothing except his hands and his mind and his growing desperation. He had read a book once, years ago, about Native Americans and how they hunted animals with traps. The book had shown pictures of traps made from branches and stones and rope. Samuel did not have rope, but he had branches. He had stones. Maybe he could figure out how to make a trap. He spent 3 days on his first attempt. He found a location where he could see animal tracks in the snow. Deer tracks, he thought, or maybe rabbit tracks. He built a simple trap using fallen branches and stones, trying to remember what he had seen in the book. He arranged the branches so that if an animal walked into them, something would happen. Maybe the animal would get caught. Maybe the heavy stone would fall. Samuel was not sure. He just knew he had to try. The trap did not work. Nothing came to it. Or if something came, it was smart enough to avoid the branches and stones. Samuel felt a wave of desperation wash over him. If he could not make a trap work, then he was going to starve to death. It was that simple. It was that terrible. But he did not give up. He built a second trap, then a third, then a fourth. Each one was a little bit different from the last one. Each one was based on what he had learned from the previous failures. On the 5th day, something happened. Samuel found a dead rabbit in one of his traps. It was not large. It was not much food, but it was something. It was real food, real meat. It was the difference between living and dying. Samuel killed the rabbit quickly. He had learned from watching his father that you had to be fast and efficient. No suffering, no cruelty, just quick and clean. Then he built a fire. This was something else he had figured out. He had found rocks that could be struck together to make sparks. He had gathered dry wood from under the evergreen trees. He had used dead grass and small twigs as kindling. And he had made fire. When he tasted the cooked rabbit meat, Samuel thought it was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. It was probably tough and gamey and not very good at all. But to Samuel, it tasted like a meal at a fine restaurant. It tasted like survival. It tasted like hope. The rabbit gave him strength. Not just physical strength, though his body definitely needed the protein. It gave him mental strength. It gave him confidence. If he could make a trap and catch a rabbit, then maybe he could catch other things. Maybe he could actually survive out here. Maybe his father was wrong. Maybe he was not useless. Maybe he was capable of more than his father had ever believed. Over the next week, Samuel caught 2 more rabbits and 1 squirrel. He was starting to understand how animals moved through the forest. He was learning where they went for food and water. He was beginning to read the forest like a book. The forest was teaching him its language, and he was learning to speak it. But then something unexpected happened, something that changed everything. Samuel was walking along a creek bed, looking for a good place to set new traps when he saw something strange. It was a structure, an actual building. It was half hidden by trees and snow, and it looked like nobody had used it in a very long time. The roof was partially collapsed. The wooden walls were gray and weathered. The door hung open like a broken mouth. Samuel approached carefully. This could be a trap. This could be something dangerous. But as he got closer, he realized it was just an old hunting cabin, an abandoned hunting cabin, probably built by someone years ago who had given up on hunting or moved away or died. The cabin was a wreck, but it was a shelter. It was so much better than crawling under trees or hiding in holes in the rocks. Samuel pushed open the door slowly. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. Dust floated through the light that came from the holes in the roof. There were old blankets on a wooden shelf. There was a fireplace made from stones. There were shelves on the wall, and on those shelves were things that seemed impossible. Things that seemed like gifts from heaven. There were cans. Metal cans with labels so faded that Samuel could barely read them. Some kind of food, preserved in metal. There was a can opener, rusty but usable. There were matches in a glass jar. Dry matches. Hundreds of them. There was rope. There was a knife. There was a book about wild plants and which ones were safe to eat. Samuel stood in the middle of that cabin and felt something break open inside his chest. These were treasures. Real treasures. Not money or gold or diamonds, but things that were worth more than any of those things. These were tools for survival. These were the difference between dying and living. This was luck. This was the first real piece of luck he had experienced since his father threw him out. He opened one of the cans carefully with the rusty can opener. Inside was beans. Just beans and some kind of sauce. Samuel ate them all, using his fingers to get every last bean out of the can. They tasted strange after so long eating only rabbit and squirrel, but they were good. More than good. They were salvation. Samuel spent that night in the cabin. He cleaned out the space. He fixed some of the holes in the roof using branches and bark and mud. He arranged his few possessions on a shelf. He built a fire in the fireplace, carefully so that the smoke would go up the chimney and out of the cabin instead of filling the small space with black smoke. As he sat by the fire that night, Samuel understood something important. He was not just surviving anymore. He was building something. He had found shelter. He had learned to hunt. He had found supplies that would help him through the long winter that was coming. He was becoming something more than just a scared child running from his father. He was becoming someone who could take care of himself. He was becoming strong. There was still so much he did not know. There was still so much that could go wrong. The winter was still coming, and he had no idea if he was truly prepared for it. But sitting by that fire in that old cabin, eating beans and feeling warmth on his face, Samuel felt something he had not felt since the day his father kicked him out. He felt hope. The old abandoned cabin kept Samuel alive through the spring and early summer. But as the months passed, he realized something important. The old cabin was falling apart. The roof had more holes than wood. The walls were rotting. The fireplace was crumbling. It would not survive another winter, and neither would he if he tried to stay in it. Samuel was 14 years old now. He had been living in the wilderness for almost 2 years. His body was stronger than it had ever been. His mind was sharper. His hands were tough and calloused from work. He had learned things that most people never learn. He could make fire from almost nothing. He could track animals and read the forest like a language. He could catch his own food and prepare it. But he had never built anything as big and important as a cabin. Yet that is exactly what he decided to do. Samuel spent days exploring the forest around the abandoned cabin, looking for the perfect location. He needed a place that was protected from the worst winds. He needed to be near water. He needed the ground to be flat enough to build on. He needed trees that he could cut down without killing the whole forest. He walked for miles, thinking and looking and planning. Finally, he found it. It was a small clearing about a mile from the old cabin. A stream ran nearby, fresh and cold and clean. Large rocks on one side would help protect from the worst winter wind. Tall trees surrounded the area, but there was enough space to build. It was perfect, or at least it was the best he was going to find. Samuel started cutting down trees. This was hard work. The knife he had found in the old cabin was good, but it was not a real axe. Still, he used it. He cut and cut and cut. His hands blistered. The blisters popped and bled. But he kept cutting. A tree would take him an entire day to cut down. Then he would spend another day removing the branches. Then another day moving the log to the building location. The work was slow. The work was painful. But the work was also the most satisfying thing Samuel had ever done. One tree became 2 trees. 2 trees became 4. 4 trees became 8. Samuel was not just cutting trees. He was beginning to understand how to build. He was thinking about which trees should be the walls, which trees should be the roof beams, how to fit pieces together, how to make something strong enough to survive winter. By late summer, Samuel had enough materials. He had cut trees and stripped branches. He had dragged heavy logs to the clearing. His body was exhausted, but his mind was alive with the vision of what he was building. He could see the cabin in his head. He could see himself sitting inside it while snow fell outside. He could see himself staying warm and safe through the long winter. Then came a hard part, the actual building. Samuel had never been taught how to build anything. He had no teacher. He had no books about construction. He had only his own intelligence and his ability to learn by trying and failing. He laid the logs down in a square pattern. He tried to make the corners fit together. But logs are round, and squares are supposed to have straight sides. The logs did not fit together the way he wanted. He made mistakes, many mistakes. He built a corner that was not square. He had to tear it apart and rebuild it. He built a wall that leaned too much to one side. He had to make it stronger. He struggled with every single step, but he did not give up. He just kept trying different ways until he found something that worked. For the roof, Samuel used branches and bark and mud. He arranged the branches at an angle so water would run off instead of pooling on top. He covered the branches with bark from trees, overlapping the pieces like fish scales so water would flow down one piece to the next. Then he covered everything with mud mixed with grass. It was not pretty, but it was waterproof. It would work. For the door, Samuel used pieces of wood tied together with rope made from strips of tree bark. He attached leather hinges from animal hides he had preserved. The door was rough and uneven, but it closed and it sealed out the wind. For the window, he carved out a small opening and covered it with a thin piece of leather that let some light through. As autumn came, Samuel put the final touches on his cabin. The walls were thick and solid. The roof would keep out the rain and snow. There was a fireplace made from stones gathered from a stream. There were shelves inside where he could store food and supplies. There was a bed made from pine branches and dry grass, covered with fur from animals he had trapped. On the day that Samuel walked into his finished cabin and closed the door behind him, something happened that he did not expect. He cried. For the first time since his father had thrown him out, Samuel cried. But these were not tears of fear or pain. These were tears of accomplishment. These were tears of pride. He had built this with his own hands, with his own mind. He had taken nothing from anyone. He had made this completely by himself. The cabin was small. It was maybe 12 feet long and 10 feet wide. The ceiling was so low that Samuel had to bend his head a little bit to avoid hitting the wooden beams. The walls were rough and uneven. The floor was just packed earth. It was not fancy. It was not comfortable compared to real houses. But it was his. It was stronger than anything he had ever created. It was shelter. It was home. As Samuel sat by the fire that first night in his new cabin, he thought about his journey. 2 years ago, he had been a helpless child thrown out into the snow. He had almost died that first night. He had been hungry and cold and desperate. He had wanted to give up so many times. But he had not given up. He had learned. He had grown. He had built something. But as he sat there watching the fire, Samuel did not know that the most important part of his survival was still waiting for him. He did not know that just beyond the forest, beyond the stream, hidden in the rocks and earth, there was something waiting that would change everything about his life. He did not know that within a few months, he would discover something that would make him not just a survivor, but someone who could truly thrive in this wilderness. Samuel was proud of his cabin, and he should have been. But he had no idea that his real journey was only just beginning. Samuel was 18 years old when he found it. 6 years had passed since the day his father threw him out into the snow. 6 years since he was a helpless child with nothing. Now he was a young man. His shoulders were broad from hard work. His hands were strong from building and hunting and surviving. His face was weathered by sun and wind and rain, but his eyes were bright with intelligence and purpose. He was no longer running from his father. He was running towards something. He did not know what yet. That autumn morning started like any other morning. Samuel woke up in his cabin, built a fire, and ate a small meal of dried meat and berries. The season was changing. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn gold and red and orange. Winter was coming, as it always did. Samuel was used to winter now. The first winter had almost killed him, but he had learned. He had adapted. He had survived 4 winters in his cabin. He could do it again. After eating, Samuel decided to explore deeper into the forest. He had been thinking about the stream that ran near his cabin. He wanted to follow it upstream to see where it came from. Maybe there would be new hunting grounds. Maybe there would be new sources of food. Maybe there would be something interesting. Samuel had learned that the forest always had surprises if you looked for them. He walked for several hours, following the stream as it twisted through the trees and rocks. The water was clear and cold. In some places it was fast and rushing. In other places it was slow and quiet. Samuel followed it patiently, not in a hurry. He was comfortable in the forest now. It was his home. He knew how to move through it without getting lost. He knew how to read its signs and understand its language. Then, around noon, Samuel noticed something strange. The water temperature had changed. He knelt down and dipped his hand into the stream. It was warm, not cold like it should be. Warm like bath water. Samuel's mind raced. This did not make sense. The sun could not make water this warm. There had to be a source. Something was heating the water. Samuel followed the warm water upstream. The temperature got higher as he went deeper into the forest. His heart was beating faster now. He could feel that something important was happening. Something unusual. Something that could change things. The stream led him to a small cave hidden between large rocks. Samuel approached carefully. He had learned to be cautious about unknown things. But as he got closer, he could see mist rising from inside the cave. Heat was coming from it. Samuel took a deep breath and crawled inside. What he saw made him stop completely. There was a pool of water glowing in the darkness. The water was crystal blue and perfectly clear. Steam was rising from the surface in beautiful wisps. Samuel approached the pool slowly, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. He knelt beside it and dipped his hand into the water. It was perfect, warm but not hot, clean and pure. Samuel sat beside that hot spring pool for 3 hours. He could not move. He could not stop looking at it. His mind was trying to understand what he was seeing. This was a hot spring, geothermal water, heat from deep inside the earth. He had read about things like this in the old book he had found in the abandoned cabin. But reading about something and actually finding it were 2 different things. As Samuel sat there, he began to understand what this discovery meant. This was not just beautiful. This was survival. This was the answer to the problem that had haunted him for 6 years. Winter, the cold, the hunger, the struggle. With this hot spring, everything changed. Over the next few weeks, Samuel created a second shelter near the hot spring. This time, he knew exactly how to build. His hands remembered the lessons of construction. He built a smaller cabin, positioned so that heat from the cave would flow into it. He dug channels to direct warm water where he needed it. He created a bathing area. He made a storage area for food. He was engineering a system. He was using nature to help him survive. That winter was different from all the others. Samuel spent his days hunting in the area around the hot spring. The warm water attracted animals. They came for the warmth and the plants that grew there. Samuel set his traps and caught more game than ever before. His food supplies were abundant. His body grew strong instead of thin. The warm water let him bathe, which made him feel human again, not just an animal fighting for survival. When spring came, Samuel realized something. He was no longer just surviving. He was thriving. He was living. He was more than okay. He was happy. The other families living in the mountain communities began to notice the change in Samuel. When they traded with him, they saw that he was healthier, stronger, more confident. They asked him what had changed. Samuel told them about the hot spring. He did not give away the exact location. Such a resource had to be protected. But he told them enough that they understood he had found something miraculous. Word spread through the mountain communities. The story of the boy who had been kicked out at 12. The boy who had survived alone in the wilderness. The boy who had built a cabin by himself. The boy who had found a hot spring and made it work for him. He was no longer just Samuel Pritchard. He was becoming a legend. When Samuel was 20 years old, something unexpected happened. A young boy arrived at his cabin asking for help. The boy had run away from a difficult home. He had heard stories about Samuel and thought maybe Samuel could help him survive. Instead of turning the boy away, Samuel took him in. He taught him everything he knew. He showed him how to build, how to hunt, how to use the hot spring, how to live in the wilderness. The boy became his friend and eventually his partner in expanding his operation. Years later, when Samuel was in his 30s, he received a letter. It was from his sister. She had found out where he was living. She wanted to see him. When they reunited, his sister cried. She could barely recognize him. He was not the frightened child she remembered. He was a man, a capable, strong, intelligent man who had built an entire life out of nothing. Samuel told his sister everything. About the first terrible night under the evergreen branches. About learning to make traps and catch rabbits. About finding the abandoned cabin. About building his own cabin. About discovering the hot spring. About becoming a teacher and a legend.